of S 323. It is on our website, and Bradley pulled it up onto the screen here. And we've got 50-ish minutes, Bradley, to do it.
Okay.
I think that it would be, it's a long bill, and there's a lot in it. We will be spending lots of time on it, so we don't need to, committee doesn't really need to understand everything in the level of detail that we will eventually, but I think just making sure that we know what's here. Any color that you want to add based on what you observed in the Senate committee, of course, would be helpful. And right away, we see that there's some familiar words: municipal regulation of agriculture. So we probably don't need to spend too much time on that section.
Okay.
But again, highlights. And if we run out of time, we do have testimony, different testimony at 2. But if we do find that we haven't gotten to the end and we need to take a break, got some time tomorrow morning or maybe tomorrow afternoon, we can have you back. And then we'll begin digging in, to the sections with testimony from other folks.
All right. Bradley Shulman, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm presenting the S 323. This is the unofficial version that was passed by the Senate. So section 1, sections 1 through 3 deal with the municipal regulation of agriculture with the finding section. It goes into a little bit more detail with the Taft Street decision. And to avoid unintended consequences about the Taft Street decision. So it calls out the Taft Street decision specifically in its finding section. But otherwise, it's very similar to the finding section that was passed here. Section 2 starts amending 24 BSA 4413D. You might recognize this as the version that was originally presented by the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets early on in the process. And this remains largely untouched from what they proposed. And so they amend 4413 to prohibit municipalities from growing plants. And it's a wider array of plants, including food for fiber and Christmas trees, so not just for food, raising, feeding, or managing small backyard poultry flock. And then we come across more familiar language about farming that meets the threshold criteria in the RAPs. And we have just some additional definitions and things. This bill also, section 3 of this bill also amends the RAPs themselves. And so some highlights of what this bill would do is to increase the income threshold to be eligible to be subject to the RAPs from $2,000 to $5,000. It permits someone who is farming plants, crops for sale, to also be eligible for the RAPs if they are donating those crops, charitable contributions on a farm that is no less than 4 contiguous acres. And then we have the livestock requirements, again, on farming that's no less than 4 contiguous acres, if you're raising this number of livestock, which is untouched in the RAPs. And then some changes. The Agency of Agriculture is looking to somewhat expand their jurisdiction over regulating certain farming practices, including the raising, feeding, or managing of livestock on between 1 and 4 contiguous acres, and has a sufficient land base for appropriate nutrient and waste management. So kind of trying to broaden the RAPs to encapsulate those ideas. And if you're raising, feeding, or managing livestock on less than 1 acre or on between 1 and 4 acres in a municipality that lacks bylaws, the secretary can determine after opportunity for a hearing that the animals are causing a significant water quality impacts and the RAP should apply. This section also removes the eligibility for the RAPs by filing a IRS 1040-F. So that's way of being regulated by the RAPs is proposed to be taken out entirely. And then we have the rest of the RAPs there that are untouched, but just for reference. And then that's their municipal regulation of agriculture piece. The next section here is section number 4 is a small Act 250 amendment amending accessory on-farm structure permits. Current law states that if you are farming and that no permit or permit amendment is required for the construction of improvements for an accessory on-farm business, et cetera. No permit or permit amendment is required for the construction improvements of an accessory on-farm business, provided that more than 50% of the total sales of prepared or processed qualifying products come from products produced where the business is located. So it's a permitting exemption, a limited permitting exemption for accessory on-farm businesses, so long as the farm has more than 50% of the total sales come from products on the farm.
And I'm sorry, Bradley, this is, maybe you said this, but I want to be sure that I didn't hear you say it, so I want to be sure that I'm right in thinking it. This is to do with Act 250 permits?
That's correct.
Okay, good, thank you.
And if you're following along, I'm on page 8 for the bottom here. And this would add another way to be eligible for this exemption if or not more than $250,000 adjusted for inflation in total sales or the equivalent in donated farm crops of the prepared or processed qualifying products come from products that are not produced on the farm, right? So you can either have more than half of your products come from the farm, or not more than $250,000 worth of your products don't come from the farm. And so as you're grappling with this section, just make sure that you are taking stock of the knots, and because there are some double negatives there that can be a little confusing and kind of get lost in the sauce a little bit, so to speak.
Representative O'Brien.
Bradley, the reference to farming here, does that send you back to the, farming is following the RAPS definition?
Yes.
So if the bill in its entirety passed, would this section then also affect the earlier sections where farming could be like 1 to 4 acres or even less than 1?
Potentially, so this would affect farms that are subject to the RAPS. And so if you do change the RAPS, you're correct that more farming activities could be subject to the RAPS and therefore qualify for this exemption, so long as they meet the percentage or dollar amount requirements here.
So the impact of these various negatives, nots and nos, is that a farm could, or an accessory on-farm business could be exempt from Act 250 permitting, even if it didn't have any of its own product, as long as the product coming from offsite was less than 250,000?
Potentially. And yeah, because it says or not more than $250,000 of the gross sales. So yes, if you had $250,000 in gross sales of items that were not on your farm and didn't sell anything of yourself, that of your own produced products, that is potentially a permissible action that would fall under this exemption.
Okay.
And there is an inflator here, adjusted for inflation. We actually looked into a bunch of different inflators, and we wound up landing on the one that's the most general, but because farming involves things like labor and food and housing and just involves so many other things, this is the most encompassing inflator to use to adjust that dollar amount for inflation. It's just the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, for all urban consumers and all items. There's no CPI index for all rural consumers, interestingly. And I was kind of surprised to learn that, but the CPI that you see here is the inflation index that we're most familiar with, like when we're talking like on the news or something. This is probably the one that you're looking at. And this is the one that the agency and the committee wound up landing on as well. And then this adds a definition of donated farm crops to be eligible for this exemption as well. So if you're just donating the farm crops and don't have any income, you could be eligible for this exemption.
Representative Bartholomew.
How does this get tied to a specific time? Like, is this locked in for this year or whenever it is enacted? So does that mean in 10 years, you've got to get out your calculator and look what the consumer price what index is? And so you have to know when the $250,000 was enacted.
Yes, and you'll know it's enacted in 2026. And so this says from the fiscal year, I can highlight it on the screen, but from the fiscal year 2026 to the fiscal year for which the amount is being determined. And there are people who do finance for a living have means of doing this. So I check with our finance folks, and this is standard statutory language that we used in other places in the VSA, and to calculate the inflator. So it's complex to those of us who aren't familiar with this, but there are ways to do it. Some agencies will actually publish what the amount is every year, as adjusted by inflation to make it easier for the public to make that determination themselves.
And my other question is now for the price you charge that you, or is it what you spend to buy the stuff?
It's total sales.
So if you're selling dinners or something, it would be how much you're charging.
That's correct.
It's not how much it costs you to make it.
That's correct. Yep.
Go ahead.
Just quickly, do inflators ever go in the opposite direction? Could you go below 250,000 if there was a correction?
Yeah. I've only ever seen an inflator go the opposite direction. I don't even know if during the Great Recession this one went in the opposite direction. I think it was pretty close if it didn't go negative slightly. In which case, relative to the year prior, this inflator might adjust down. That's very uncommon. Yeah, very, very uncommon.
But it allows for that.
But it allows for that. Yeah.
We saw there was an inflator in the language that the Labor Department uses for the farm worker housing.
Oh, right, yeah,
And there might have been, in that case, a reference to it can't be below 0.
right.
But I mean, there was a cap. It couldn't be above 5, but I think maybe also it couldn't be negative. We also have in our statute, the minimum wage law, I think is now indexed to inflation. And that might have something similar that
Right.
minimum wage can't ever go
More,
down, even
yeah.
if inflation were negative.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. All right, moving on. We are on page 9. This is a change to a Carey's little section. Well, I shouldn't say Carey's little section, but it's a very discrete change. So section 5 deals with a statute that permits a milk producer, or deals with milk producer and milk purchasers. And so if a milk producer has a contract, whether verbal or written, with a milk purchaser to buy the milk producer's product, and the milk purchaser backs out, the milk producer can ask for a hearing with the Agency of Agriculture to see if there was a legitimate reason for the milk purchaser to back out. And so the only thing that this statute does is it changes some language. There's some conforming language, but down here, if a request for a hearing is made by, the statute currently says purchaser, and it should say producer, because in this instance, the hearing would be requested by the producer. So someone who is contracted to sell their products to a purchaser. And it didn't make sense to have the statute this way. It looks like it was just an oversight. And because here it says if a request for a hearing is made by a producer, refusal of the purchaser shall not become operative until a hearing, a decision on the purchaser's favor by the secretary. So basically, if the purchaser is looking to back out of a contract, written or verbal, and the producer asks for a hearing, the purchaser still has to engage with the contract until a decision on the hearing has been made. And so the Agency of Agriculture, they proposed this language, and they said it didn't really make sense if the purchaser has to request a hearing, then that would obligate them to, it just didn't make sense the way it was. We are on page 11, section 6. This is changing the farm to school grant program as it currently is to just the farm to school program. And what this would do is to permit the Agency of Agriculture to provide grants or contracts for the purpose of helping Vermont schools develop a farm to school program. And that's the primary change here. The only reason I can tell you from my no knowledge of this is that there's some efficiency in providing grants versus or providing contracts versus grants. Grants tend to have more reporting requirements. But the Agency of Agriculture could explain more about why they're pursuing this change from a policy perspective and how that would affect their operations.
Representative Boston.
Who's Roseau McLaughlin? Because apparently they're naming this program after
She
someone.
was the rep from my district.
Yes,
That's
and
the way.
Okay.
yes,
And
yes,
that's the existing program then is named after her?
yes, yes. And I had actually a note on her history, and I don't have that with me.
Okay.
But she was a champion of farming and,
Okay.
and
Awesome.
bringing food to the people.
So this is, this program is already called the Roseau McLaughlin Farm to School.
Yes, yeah.
We've
So
never
that,
heard that name,
Right.
or I have, I don't
Yeah,
remember.
no, I mean,
Yeah.
we've talked about farm to school a lot, and I never
So
heard
we're
that.
not normally hearing that name
At least
associated.
once a week.
Like,
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
But,
There was, I think when we had the conversation about the farm and forestry relief fund program.
Yeah.
We talked about the distinction between awards and grant.
Yeah.
There were two different words,
Contracts.
and it was critical. Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but be curious when the agency comes in to hear if this is part of the same logic. Representative Nelson?
well, I just thinking, grants imply money given and not expected to be repaid. And contracts, although may not be as wordy, and they don't have to expect payment, but it gives them more latitude to help them set up maybe how to get in contact with farmers to set up their programs, but they'll explain it to us.
Yeah, let me keep going then. I said to Bradley, if we didn't get through this by the time we have to stop, he can come back tomorrow, but we're trying to just keep it very high level and get a sense of what's in here. So if it feels like we're speeding along, that's why.
Section 7 repeals the pest control compact. It was an interstate compact that was defunct, that went defunct in 2014. So the state has not been making payments into this fund. Basically, it was an interstate compact to stop the spread of pests interstate, so it operated as kind of insurance fund. And it went defunct in or around 2014 due to a change in their tax status with the IRS. And it just became cost prohibitive for this compact to operate. And so they went defunct, and this would take this corresponding section out of our statute. Section 8 is amending the pesticide exam requirements. And so this one would allow someone to take, currently the pesticide exam is limited to, I believe, 3 retakes. I guess I could just scroll down to the language. Currently, the pesticide examination is limited to 3 retakes, and this would remove that retake requirement, or excuse me, that limitation on the number of times you can retake it entirely. And it also removes the fee for state government, municipal, and public education institution applicators. It would remove the $30 fee for them. And then it just brings out in statute here, there should be no limitation on the frequency for retaking examinations for private, commercial, non-commercial, or government applicator certifications or dealer licenses. So it allows someone to apply for that certificate as much as they'd like. So we are on section 9, conforming seed law to universal standards, and so this the next sections, next 5 or 6 sections here deal with that. And so this makes some a couple of conforming changes. It amends the definition of flower seed to include wildflowers. it adds some additional information on labeling, and including adding requirements for the labeling of bulk seeds, and that are used to provide the seed label information required by this chapter. So the labeling, this chapter will add or change labeling requirements for seeds. And I'll just kind of flesh that definition out a little bit. And you see some prohibitions on noxious weed seeds. And those are currently in statute anyway, that are prohibited, that can't be controlled through typical agricultural practices, or very difficult to control through good agricultural practices. And then there's some restricted weed seeds. That's not changing much here, except for the prohibited noxious weed seeds, adding flower, tree, or shrubs that might fit those definitions that are defined by the state by rule. And we're adding a couple of definitions just to change language. And so this, we're changing the word sell or sale throughout this these sections to include to just mean distribute. And distribute is defined as import, manufacture, produce, mix, blend, offer for sale, barter, supply the seed through any means, including sales outlets, catalogs, telephone, internet, or any electronic means. Just to kind of just take kind of a belt and suspenders approach to defining selling in this way. It's just a kind of closing loopholes that people might try and use. And distributor means.
Go ahead, John.
Just finish your.
I was going to say distributor means any person who distributes seeds and affixes, and this distributor means a person who is in charge of, or who would be responsible for distributing the seeds into the state and affixing the label. So it's a distributor's obligation to meet the labeling requirements that you'll see. And it adds the definition of treated articles that we might be familiar with, but means seeds that receive the application of a substance or process designed to reduce, control, repel certain disease organisms, insects, or pests from attaching to the seeds or seedlings, or designed to enhance the availability uptake of plant nutrients in the root system. And the secretary may apply terms as used in the Association of American Seed Control Officials adopted in the recommended uniform seed law. So it incorporates those definitions in that text.
Brother, just one specific question about seeds. Is there a definition of seeds like potatoes? Are they seeds or tulip bulbs, or is it more seeds in the traditional?
Yeah. So we'll see things like flower seeds here, noxious weed seeds, regular weed seeds, and let me just pull up the statute real quick. We have vegetable seed in the statute, and I guess here I actually don't see it, but in the statute itself, it defines vegetable seeds. And in a section I didn't include there, genetically engineered seeds are defined.
Grain seeds.
Yeah, on page 14, line 5, it lists agricultural seed, grass forage, cereal, oil, fiber, and other kinds of crops commonly recognized as agricultural seeds. Lawn seeds, combination of such seeds, and then it may include noxious weed seeds.
It's not yet, so it's back in the beginning of section
Yeah.
9 here.
My bigger question was, this all seems like it came like oftentimes our House Miscellaneous Ag from the agency. Later on, are there sections that maybe stakeholders suggested, or is it really all Agency of Ag stuff?
That would be a good question for them, because I don't know the process that they went through to come up with this. So this text was directly from them, but that process could have included other stakeholders, and that I'm not aware of.
Oh, I was just wondering if you were there when perhaps there was sort of this Senate miscellaneous ag, and then because it's so big and bulky, they just kept adding sections that weren't from the original.
Yeah. There were a couple of sections that were added by other parties, so not all of the sections were added by the Agency of Agriculture, and I think most of what is left here was from the Agency of Agriculture. with the exception of the last section and the exception of the accessory on-farm business section, I believe. I might have to double check that. And the stuff, we'll talk about VEDA in a moment, but the stuff from VEDA also did not come from the Agency of Agriculture, but they were aware of it when it came through. Okay, and I've got some notes on this one because this section just makes some general updates throughout. And but the duties and authority of the secretary, this is just amending this section to, instead of transported, sold, or sale, we're just changing that language to distributed in or into the state for sowing purposes. So we're using the word distributes just to clarify what we mean about selling or offering for sale. So that's a change there. And the label requirements here. So this section amends labeling requirements for treated seeds. So all treated agricultural, vegetable, or flower seeds have additional labeling requirements. And so it has to describe the treatment and identifying the commonly accepted chemical name or description of the process used, or abbreviated chemical name of the substance that it is treated with. So to give more consumer information. And if the substance is in the amount present within the seed is harmful to human health or other vertebrate animals, an appropriate caution statement like do not use for food, feed, or oil purposes. And the caution statement for mercurial or similarly toxic substances shall be a poison statement or symbol. So just adding that and clarifying that requirement for treated articles if we know them to be harmful. And then for seed treated with an inoculant, the label shall state the expiration date, meaning the date beyond which the inoculant is not considered effective. So just kind of changing the language there just to be clearer about what they're looking to regulate. And then this section would also requires bulk displays of seed to be labeled with the same kind of requirements that you would expect on an individual package. This section here is replacing sold and sale with the words distribute. And this is unchanged from law, but what this section deals with is a person who distributes seed will not be subject to a penalty under this chapter. So it's talking about penalties. Won't be subject to a penalty under this chapter unless the person has failed to obtain an invoice, genuine grower's declaration, or other labeling information, or to take other such reasonable precautions to ensure that the identity of seed is so set forth. So basically it sets a standard for how much knowledge or what a person needs to do to actually be subject to penalties for the labeling requirements of this section. All right, section 13, we're changing the administrative penalties section for substituting the word sold for the word distribute. And then this section adds a penalty for failure to report the quantity of genetically engineered or modified, genetically engineered, treated, and untreated seeds sold in the state. So it's adding a reporting requirement. I think I might have said penalty requirement. It's a big reporting requirement here. And we're moving on here to section 14. So this section has to deal with registration and reporting. So individuals can't distribute a seed without registering annually, and it discusses the registration fees. So this section looks like it is changing the amount of fees that are going to be paid, and it does not. So it looks like it deletes the $10 per ton fee for any seed sold in containers of more than 10 pounds. That's actually going to be moved a little bit later. So in consultation with JFO, it doesn't look like there's any kind of fiscal change in the amount of fees that would be collected. They're just moving in different places. So we're getting the registration fee is $85 for each annual distributor of any seed into the state, and registrations for the calendar year. It expires on the last day of December of each year. And then just some conforming language for the registration requirements. And then we're coming back down. And then they're plugging in the $10 fee back down here. So a fee of $10 per ton of seeds distributed in containers of more than 10 pounds shall accompany the annual report that is required by distributors who are selling seeds into the state. That report is due on or before the 15th of each year. So basically, you pay $85 to register for each distributor that distributes any seed into the state, and then $10 per ton of any containers of more than 10 pounds. And then those distributors have to make a report each year. And then when they do that report, they pay their $10 per 10 pound container fee at that time. So it's a little confusing of the changes, but a lot of they're conforming changes and just moving things around to try and ultimately make it just a little clearer about what individuals are required to do.
So we will have plenty of opportunity to dig in. It is a little confusing, and who knew there was so much seed law? I think that the clerk, our House clerk, is likely to look at this and say, this bill has to go to Ways and Means if this language stays in. And even if nothing's changing, that's our rule, apparently. So we should just be keeping that in mind when we're getting to the point where we're ready to pull this out and not, not forget to tell them. That's my job, but also make sure that we're leaving time for that to happen.
And then this adds an additional reporting requirement for all seeds, regardless of the container size. So before we were talking about 10-pound containers, regardless of container size, all seeds distributed into Vermont, regardless of that size, shall report annually to the Secretary on or before February 15th on a form supplied. And then at a minimum, the form will require disclosure of the quantity of seeds, especially containing genetically engineered material, treated seed, and untreated seed. So it's adding reporting requirements for genetically engineered material, treated seeds, and untreated seeds that don't currently exist. And then some additional requirements here about reporting for genetically engineered material, pesticide treated seeds. There you have that there.
All of this reminds me of Africa last year.
Yeah, what was that?
That was, the American Association of.
Beneficial something.
Yeah,
Beneficial substances.
substances or something.
It's a very dry technical.
Yeah. Right, a snappy acronym. I'll be right.
Yeah, it is a very technical change. I think overall, it does not change the substance of current law much, except with requiring additional labeling requirements, redefining what we mean by selling to mean distribute, which is lots of different methods of distribution. I already said labeling requirements, adds a definition of treated seed, and then some more reporting requirements for genetically engineered seeds as well. Very technical, a little dry, as is these next few sections as well. So section 15 starts our consolidation of the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program into VEDA. So some background: last year, VEDA moved a bunch of programs to its place in Vermont law. And it did not move VCAP, and we don't know why, but VCAP was not one of those, or VACP was not one of those programs. And so what this would do was essentially repeal 10 VSA Chapter 16A. So the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program is its own chapter right now. And then essentially moving that to 10 VSA Chapter 12, Subchapter 16. 10 VSA Chapter 12 is where VEDA lives in the statutory text, adding a subchapter to that, the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program. The Vermont Agricultural Credit Program is currently administered by the Vermont Agricultural Credit Corporation. And you'll see later on in the statute that this bill would give VITA the authorization to dissolve the Vermont Agriculture Credit Corporation, and essentially administer the VACP directly. To add another layer of complexity, VITA already oversees the Vermont Agriculture Credit Corporation. And so this essentially just removes a step, but when you bring those folks in, they can give you some more history about why that is. But essentially it's removing a layer of just kind of a layer of management. And so all these definitions have come over from the current statute, and I need to refer to my notes here. And all these definitions have come over. We're adding a definition of authority to mean the Vermont Economic Development Authority. But all these definitions come over from the current statute. It's all underlined because it's moving. So that doesn't mean this all changed. Nothing has changed except we added a definition of the authority here. So we're just kind of scrolling down. We'll get through a few pages, and we are on page 26, line 15. And then, so this section describes the Vermont Agriculture Credit Program. And so this section redesignates the current law without change, except for adding this section redesignates current law without substantive changes. So the non-substantive change is it's changing the word corporation to the word authority. So its authority means VITA. And so VITA will be administering the program. So wherever in current law it would say corporation, this bill would replace the word corporation with the word authority to signify that VITA is the organization that will be administering the program. But this particular statute comes over without changes except for that change. And we're scrolling down. This is very dry, but it's also a lot to scroll through quickly, so might get.
Well, are we gonna get to a point where we see language deleted from another statute?
I will tell you if there is something, and I don't think that there is much here. There is, I'll tell you in a moment, but basically there's a section in the current law that defines the powers of the Vermont Agriculture Credit Corporation. VITA already has those powers. And so that language was deleted from the current statute because VITA already has that power and it didn't need that power to be reauthorized in this subchapter. And so that's the primary thing that has been deleted in the current statute is anything kind of authorizing how the Vermont Corporation works. And how the Vermont Agricultural Corporation should run. Those are the things that were deleted. The rest of this kind of comes over without substantive changes. So we are on, let's see.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Representative Nelson.
Council, is the Vermont Agriculture Credit Program a new program inside of VITA, or has it always existed inside of VITA? I've never heard of it before.
Yeah, so it's VITA, the Vermont Agricultural Credit Corporation, and the Vermont Agriculture Credit Program. And so it's just kind of 3 layers of management for this program.
And it's always been there?
And it has been there for a long time. I want to say almost 20 years, but I think that might be overstating it a little bit, but it's been there for a long time.
Good, thank you.
There's an inflator on statutory language with it.
And so the general power section is the section that has changed the most from current law. And because this section replaces the powers of the Vermont Agriculture Credit Corporation with the powers of VITA as provided in 10 VSA section 2016. So like I said a moment ago, this section, if you looked in current law, it will list all the powers the corporation has, and VITA already has those powers, so that was just taken out. This section also gives VITA the authority to dissolve the Vermont Agriculture Credit Corporation in accordance with Vermont law that deals with the dissolution of nonprofits. So the Vermont Agricultural Credit Corporation is a nonprofit organization, and this would allow VITA to dissolve it. The loan eligibility standards is coming over without substantive changes. So standards for making loans under the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program. And then that's it for the move. The rest of these rest of these sections deal with conforming changes because we're moving a statute. We want to check cross references and things. And there is one substantive change here, and I'll go over that in a moment. So section 17 here is a conforming change to a cross reference. And so just kind of takes out the cross reference to statute and just kind of conforms that language. Section 18 changes the definition section. So this 10 VSA 212 is VITA's definition section, VITA's primary definition section. They did not want the definitions in VITA's primary definition section to apply to VACP, the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program. And so they added a caveat in VITA's primary definition section saying that if you're looking to define terms about the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program, don't look here. Instead, those terms are all defined in the Vermont Agriculture subchapter that we just went over. All right. It's all very dry.
I'm thinking, I wonder if anybody else is thinking that somebody's gonna have to report this bill, or at least this section of this bill. It's not gonna be me necessarily.
You can watch the recording in the Senate, watch them breeze right over this.
Sorry, we didn't understand it.
No, they went over it, but they did not go over as much. I'm going over in a lot more detail than perhaps needs be. And yeah, there weren't a lot of questions. Be ready to define ratite though, if you do report on this, if you did not hear about that.
Okay.
That came up on the Senate floor. And another conforming change to a statute, just changing a citation. And so this is a little bit of a substantive change. So we're looking at the Vermont Jobs Fund, which is another program that VITA administers. And the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program, from what VITA has told me and the committee, the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program at some point had lending operations established at interest rates and terms and conditions set by the authority to establish a line of credit not to exceed $100 million to be advanced to the Vermont Agricultural Credit Program to support lending operations for farmers. And VITA can testify to this more fully, but the short of it is that this has not existed for some time. And so when we were making conforming changes, they asked the Senate Agriculture Committee to take it out because this is not a program that they've been administering for quite some time. And they can provide more information about that to you folks, but I didn't want to flag that because these sections here are mostly conforming changes. But with the exception of this piece, this is substantive, even though that program isn't actually operating in reality.
There is no $100 million sitting out there somewhere.
That's correct. Yes. Okay. No, that is correct. And that is a good question because it looks like it's a big program, and having them provide some more information, I think, will be helpful for the committee.
Representative O'Brien?
Just at the top of this, Bradley, going the other way, back to what you covered. So just not to be confused, the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund is different than this Vermont Jobs Fund.
I'm not 100%. My inclination is to say yes. I'm not 100% certain about the difference between the Sustainable Jobs Fund and the Jobs Fund. I can look into it. I don't know.
This one, right?
VITA has a lot of like little programs kind of nestled under it.
Yeah.
And so when you kind of pull back at the statute, you really see that they administer a lot, and they might be able to provide more information about that piece.
We could ask, we could also ask Patricia if you wanted to contact Ellen, I guess, from the
Yeah.
Sustainable Jobs Fund, just to make sure that it's something different. I bet it is.
You know, sometimes I wonder and seeing the money they used to have put into the Vermont Agriculture Credit Program. And they, stopped doing that for whatever reason. If those dollars were available, because those are low interest loans, are easier to apply for, quicker to respond. If that would be an aid towards our agriculture anytime, but especially in times of disaster.
We'll have to dig into it.
Yeah.
We'll do that. Yeah.
And then section 21. Let's see, I think I might have skipped. And another conforming change in section.
There's a reference to Vermont Sustainable Job.
Okay. The Sustainable Energy Loan Fund. Okay, yeah, interesting. Section 21, another conforming reference. And then section 22 gets to hemp. And so this will probably take 5-ish minutes to go over. If you want me to pause here and come back, or if you want me to keep going, it's up to the committee.
Is that the whole rest of the bill?
The whole rest of the bill is hemp, and then there is there's one small section at the very end that won't take very long.
Well, we talked quite a bit about hemp, but we didn't see the bill. I think, why don't we go ahead? Let's.
Okay.
We'll hear the 5-minute summary.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Can be done. Yeah.
Okay. And so the impetus, I came in and we spoke a little bit about the impetus for the changes. So I'll breeze over that, but there's a little bit of a findings and purpose section here. The definition section are brought out over. So just as a reminder, this section proposes to take regulation of hemp from the Secretary of Agriculture to the CC, the Cannabis Control Board. Hemp is still going to be considered an agricultural product. Cannabis is not. Hemp is. Even though they're technically the same plant, but this will move the regulation over to the CCB. So a lot really hasn't changed. And so this is the definition section. It's being brought over. But one thing that is changing is we're using the words grow and grower to be interchangeable with the words produce and producer. And that will come into effect when we're looking at fees and things of the sort later on. And the hemp and hemp infused products definition here is being changed to add a line that just says is not lawful in interstate commerce. And so hemp product or hemp infused products, it's just changing that to say that anything that's not unlawful in interstate commerce. Because again, the impetus here was changing the federal law, change the types of hemp products that might become unlawful based on their THC concentration and on the strain of THC that they use. So we are down to hemp hemp is staying in agriculture products. So this is coming over from current law and removing some references to federal law that are in the current law because that federal law has changed. And the cultivation of hemp is still required from the RAPS that's coming over from current law. We're required to follow the RAPS that is still coming over from current law. The registration and licensure is changing. So we're seeing the categories again. Producers are essentially the growers of hemp. Processors who take the raw product and turn it into a product, or take the raw plant and turn it into a product for sale, and then products. All hemp-derived products containing a reasonably expected to contain more than 0.4 THC concentration. So 0.3 and below is supposed to be non-intoxicating and not unlawful under federal commerce. 0.4 and above, could potentially be intoxicating is required to be registered. And so each of these categories of individuals who are dealing with hemp and hemp products are growing hemp and hemp products are required to license annually with the Cannabis Control Board. And then there's some denial reasons for reasons why the Cannabis Control Board could deny a person and they're coming over from current statute, but they include failure to establish that activities comply with state and federal law, refuse entry by the board onto the premises for inspection, fail to submit information, and fail to submit the fees. This section gives rulemaking authority that brings over from current law, but it does not require, but permits the board to adopt rules to deal with things like testing for THC levels, authorizing methods for THC, requirements for labels, requirements for disclosure of the amount of cannabinoids in hemp products, requiring licensees and registrants to have commercially reasonable insurance, and then adds the licensees and registrants, including out-of-state purveyors, obtain insurance. That's an addition from current law. 7, 8, 9 are all additions from current law. Prohibit hazardous additives to hemp products or specified additive limits relative to substances that are toxic or not generally recognized as safe, or designed to make the product more addictive or appealing to persons under 21 years of age. So it can make rules about those items. And specify when a registered hemp product contains more than 0.4 milligrams of THC must be registered for sale for persons 21 years of age or older. The board shall adopt rules, a requirement for rulemaking, establishing requirements for licensure of processors of hemp and hemp-derived process intermediaries and hemp products. And again, more permissive, the board may adopt rules, establish requirements for consumer sale of any product containing THC or other cannabinoids. And the board may also adopt rules prohibiting a person from making false or misleading or substantiating claims for their cannabinoid containing products. So a lot of rules about how you sell a product, how you market it, and labeling requirements, and then not adding additives to make something a little more tasty for individuals who are not of age.
No bubblegum flavor and red food number 9, red dye number 9.
I don't want to get us too far off our schedule today, Bradley, so.
I can cruise through the rest of it.
Well, okay, yeah, but I think that we will ask you to come back and maybe start at the beginning again of the hemp section.
Okay.
Just because there's a lot here, and
Okay.
I know that
Yeah.
it's been explained to us that we're taking existing law and moving it from one part of statute to another, but there's a lot, so I think
Okay.
we should be.
Okay. And I could just stop here if you wanted to take a break before your next
Well-
speaker, or if I could just keep going.
No,
until-
why don't you, like, I can
I'll
just.
give you the 2-second version.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
This section,
Okay, so this section,
Yeah.
yeah, this section largely copies existing law, but it's testing and enforcement. The administrative penalties section does change the existing law in terms of the amount of the penalty, and it also permits the board to enforce administrative penalty of a civil collection in a civil collection action in the Superior Court. This does change current law. So in current law, there's a different administrative penalty section, and with a limit on the amount of the fee. So under current law, there's a penalty of $1,000 per violation. And this one doesn't have those kind of limits on what the violation might be. And so just to kind of keep that in mind. And then it also incorporates by reference kind of administrative protections, like administrative law protections for individuals who deny the license to appeal that to the Cannabis Control Board and then to the Supreme Court if they so desire. And then a fee section. This does change fees fairly substantially. It increases the fee for a processor from $100 to $500, but it removes fees in current law for the growing of hemp based on certain pounds. If you have 500 pounds under current law, 500 pounds, you pay of growing hemp, you pay $100 fee, 10,000 pounds, a $500 fee, and so forth under current law. And those fees are removed entirely. And then these two sections, sections 24 and 25, amend cross references. And section 30, we're not talking about hemp anymore at all. We're actually talking about the National Resource Conservation Council. And this section amends a section about their ability to mortgage. And so this section removes a prohibition for the NRCCs, removes a prohibition on them to apply for a mortgage to purchase land or purchase property. And so this bill would permit them to do that and takes effect on July 1st.
One quick question, you don't even have to deal with it today, but I just wondered with hemp moving to CCB, what happens to the sort of agricultural, say, grant world for a hemp producer? Like if you apply for a working lands grant or you want NRCS grant or FSA financing, does it have to work its way through the CCB then?
You know, it would depend on what those requirements for those grant programs are. And so if there was a requirement saying that it has to be administered by the Secretary of Agriculture or the Secretary of Agriculture has to participate, that could potentially affect those grant programs, but it would really depend on that piece. This bill does not change how someone grows hemp. It doesn't change it doesn't change kind of on the ground stuff very much. It just moves the regulatory and the testing regime from the Secretary of Agriculture to the Cannabis Control Board. And they're doing that so that the Cannabis Control Board can keep better tabs on the THC content of these hemp-derived products. And because if they have a higher THC content than required by federal or than permitted by federal law, so above 0.3 milligrams, then those products could be prohibited by interstate commerce and potentially be subject to federal drug enforcement. And so the Cannabis Control Board's goal, and they can talk more about that, is to kind of make that process similar. In terms of the nuts and bolts of like applying for grant programs, I'm not 100% sure how this would affect it. I don't think that any kind of effect would be intentional though.
Yeah. So we could ask them.
Yeah. Okay, I think, thank you, Bradley, and there's a lot here. I think I underestimated how much time it would take even just to get a high level overview. So we'll have you back to dig in a little more to the section. And I'm not sure that will be this week even. I want to try and break it to baseball parts and have it do a part at a time and have it not be scattered. So when we go to hemp, then we'll focus on hemp. And similarly with the other parts of the bill. And I think just in terms of reporting it, I imagine we hear oftentimes where there's a committee bill where you go around the room basically and everybody stands up and says a piece. So if you think that you'd like to report on the hemp section or the seed section, you can let me know before somebody else says if you really want to do that section. And then you'll each have our area of expertise, so we don't all need to know about seeds necessarily.
There is a section by section. So if you're reporting, there is a section by section for the whole bill. I will take out the pieces that were amended out, but so you'll have that too.
Good. All right.
What are we gonna add to it?
What are we going to add to it? That's